Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure being here. It's actually my third time here at the Data Innovation Summit, and I always love the conversations that we're having with the community. And also to be able to actually talk about these, to me, very dear topics. I've been talking about data mesh a lot for the past 2 years, but now, for today, I'm really focusing down on one particular aspect of that, which is data products. Right. Yeah, who am I? As Lotte already said, I'm currently the Associate Director of Data Engineering at HelloFresh, the world's last leading meal kit company. I've previously been at Zalando, yes, that is correct. I only moved over about 1.5 months ago. Still very new, everything to me. But I've been very much working on productionizing large-scale data infrastructure and also data management platforms. And I've been quite around as a data mesh advocate as well as a content creator. So you might have seen me already as the banana-suited gentleman at somewhere before, talking about data mesh a lot. Just very quickly, some numbers for HelloFresh. I'm not going through all of these now in detail. I've personally been a customer myself already for the past 2 years. I really love the service, way before I even was thinking about joining the company. So if anybody wants to catch up on a couple of these points, definitely hit me up afterwards. What do I have in petto for you folks for today? Well, first of all, I want to, as always, tell you a little story that I think might be quite insightful, that we can learn something from in coming in from the angle of data products. But then we really want to take a look at data products as a core, right? What is a data product? What makes a good data product? And then I also want to go a little bit technical, and I want to take a look at what are the most important aspects that you need to take a look at on how to build a data product. But starting off with a little bit of a story, the story that I'm about to tell you is about a team that was responsible for the sales data of an organization. They were quite an important team for that matter. The sales data of the organization has always been the key focus point for a lot of business decisions. Was coming more from the traditional side of data processing, more the data warehousing side of things, BI reporting, dashboarding, all these kind of things built up on top of that. But over time, you could also see that more and more, let's say, newer mechanisms on how to work with analytical data, for instance, training machine learning models on top of that, were coming into place. So the importance of this particular data set was becoming more and more across the organization. Now, this was, again, coming from a data warehousing background, more like a batch data set, was made available once a day with a couple hours delay into the new day. All the data from the previous day would be made available. And the team had the great idea of lowering the latency on when people can actually consume this information, right? They wanted to turn this batch data set once a day with a couple hours delay into a streaming data set that only had maximum 30 minutes delay, so that people could work with the sales information much, much quicker and make decisions much, much quicker. They did that. They learned a lot of new technologies. They learned a lot of new ways on how to work with data, specifically streaming approaches for that matter. And there was a lot of challenges on the way as well in terms of scoping what they actually had in mind. And they were reducing a little bit the scope. They were really ensuring that they could nail down what they had set out for. And ultimately, after 9 months, they had a first prototype. And after another 3 months, they were actually shipping the first version to production. Really great achievement. But what's wrong with this story? They achieved everything that they set out for, right? They made large progression in terms of technology, but I guess that to some extent is also already the problem within. They were driven by technology. They were not actually driven by business need. Because let me tell you the remaining part of that story. Once they actually shipped it to production, there was 5, 6 teams that started adopting the new data set. 2 or 3 of them dropped out again after some time because the reduction in scope that needed to be taken to actually be able to ship that version was not allowing them anymore to fulfill the use case that they had. And for another year, the team was iterating over this project, over this product that they've been building, only to then realize, okay, the investment is way too big, and the project was shut down. And what can we learn from that? right? It is important to not be solely driven by technology when it comes to evolving the data that you have across the organization. They were really working with a data set. From a technological perspective, they were not working with a data product that was focusing on the needs of the organization. And that being said, let's actually dive a little bit into what is a data product, for that matter, right? Data product consists of two parts, kind of obvious, data and product. The data part, of course, I don't need to tell you folks about what data is about. You wouldn't be here at the conference if you don't have a good understanding of that part. Let me just summarize it as the foundation of decision-making, for that matter. But the product aspect is something that I think is much more important, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. And compare that to something like a product that you would actually buy in a supermarket, right? Usually when you have a product like this, you have a target audience, right? You have somebody that this product is for. You have stakeholders of your product that you want to satisfy, and you have something like a unique sales point that makes your product valuable to the context that you're in. And these are exactly some of the questions that we want to ask here, right? Like, if I'm looking as data as a product, like what is the unique sales point that my data actually has? Like, what makes it valuable across the organization? What prevents somebody else to just do something on their own because it's better fit for the purpose, right? Who are my customers? Understanding that in the first place, right? Like being able to talk to them and also being able to understand what do they actually need? What are the desires of my customers? So that I can figure out with them together what is the direction that we should take this data product forward to. Yeah. And of course also to some extent like what price is justified, right? In the example that I showed at the beginning, a lot of investment was done upfront just to, after a year of project work, realize that we were actually building something that wasn't even needed for the organization, right? Start with the needs of the customer. Start really with the desires of the customers, and by that derive also what kind of investments actually make sense in the organization. Now, what makes a good data product? The first thing that I want to touch upon here is ownership, right? You want to have teams that take on the ownership about the data that they are producing and that they are sharing with the organization. And it comes from multiple angles, right? You come from taking responsibility for the technical aspects of the data, right? How can people actually integrate with the data that you have in a very easy way? How can they make the most value without huge investments up front and a huge knowledge gap that they first need to fill? But also taking responsibility from the organizational aspects of your data product, right? Again, filling in the information that is required for people across the organization to make sense of your data. Describe the content of the data itself so that people can have like a better understanding of what they are actually dealing with. And the second big point I want to make is data product management. Ideally, you want to have a dedicated data product manager that is taking care of your data product, right? That has the capacity and the resources to actually connect with your customers, with your stakeholders, yeah? To try to build up like a stakeholder landscape, to try to build up what is needed to engage with the people across the organization. And to ultimately also set, but also again, communicate to the stakeholders a product vision. Right? What is the direction that we actually want to take this in? What's the aim that we have? What's the target that we want to work towards? And again, reflect that against the customer base and trying to figure out, does it actually make sense? And ultimately translating this into a roadmap and also maintaining it that is prioritized based on some advancements that you want to take as bets, let's say, that you hope will be paying off in the long term, but of course also largely driven by the needs of the stakeholders and the customers. Now, that's the part where I want to switch over a little bit the perspective towards, okay, like how can we now actually build a data product? What are the core parts that are required to get this done? What do I actually need to do to build a data product? And the first thing is, well, I've somewhat broken this down into three main areas, let's say. And the first step is really to cover the basics, right? We want to get to the point that we have naming. We want to get to the point that we have a schema for our data. We want to get to the point that we have descriptions for our data, right? So what about this? Does this look good to you? Is this like what we were thinking about when we were talking about naming, schema, descriptions? It has all this, but it's completely useless, right? What we're actually looking more like is something like this, where we have clearly understandable naming, where we have a well-defined schema where people easily can make sense of, where we have some descriptions that give additional context about what we are actually dealing with. And by the way, this is like so short as it could be just to fit on a single slide. Yeah, descriptions can go much, much deeper when it comes to that. And of course, they even need to be to convey the full context of the business value and the business needs that you're covering with your data product so that people can really understand, hey, should I use this for my use case or should I maybe even be searching for something else? And I threw in one additional thing there as well, which is ownership, right? I mentioned this before. Displaying ownership information to the people that want to actually work with this data is also incredibly important so that they can also reach out to people and understand and communicate if they have further questions. Yeah? Something like descriptions, again, it's an iterative process. You, as somebody that might be producing the data by yourself, you know all the technical details about it, and you will be describing the parts that sound relevant to you, but it doesn't need to mean that everybody else that you will be sharing this with has the same understanding, right? They might lack the context, they might require additional information to make sense of what you're actually trying to share with them. And that, of course, is something where you need to iterate over as well, where you need to work together with your stakeholders, I cannot mention that enough, to really figure out and evolve over time how this will look like. Yeah. So, getting back to the step one thing, and let's refine that a little bit more. We don't just want to have any names, we want to have consistent naming across the organization. Ideally, we even want to have some organizational-wide standards that are followed across all the different teams that are working with data. We want to have a well-defined schema, and that is not only coming in terms of good naming again, but also in terms of a lot of technical attributes that are needed, like data types, like nullability, like all these kind of things that you want to define to give people a technical understanding of what your data is actually about. Understandable descriptions, yeah. The thing that I showed 2 slides before was basically just some comments that probably somebody left on the code when they were putting together this data that helped them remind themselves of what this is actually about. But it is absolutely not helpful. So having something that is, again, understandable for the people, for the target audience that you're working with is absolute key here. And good communication, right? Providing a contact point is only a starting point for that. You want to have good communication, both from the product side and from the technical side. Yeah? You want to have the product folks, again, communicate their vision, communicate the target that they have in mind, but also clearly communicate and learn about the needs of the stakeholders. But you also want to have the tech folks communicate with the people that are ultimately consuming this data to answer back questions that they have about semantics, that they have about specific technical details about the data that the people need to actually work with that. The second step then is scalability. All that we've talked about so far was like really focusing on my own small local scope and having something described in a way that other people can use it and can make sense of it, right? But what we're now looking is, well, we do not only have 1 or 2 teams anymore that want to use this, but we might have dozens or even hundreds of teams that want to engage with that. And for that, you need better ways than manually provided descriptions to build trust, but also to enable technical integrations with what you're offering here. Yeah. And for that, you need things like input and output definitions, right? You want to give people an understanding of where your data is coming from, right? You want to build like a lineage graph in terms of like the dependencies that you have across the organization so that they can also understand if something is broken with your data product and it is already known that one of the upstream dependencies that you have is also broken, that there's a correlation between those two. But of course also having technical definitions in terms of the output of your data, right? This can be very simple things like a storage location in an S3 bucket, right? This can be very much more advanced things like an API endpoint that can be used to actually connect with your data product and to retrieve some of the information. This can be a table in a database or in a distributed query engine that you have on top of your storage layer. So this can heavily depend. And it also heavily depends on the organization, of course, on what are the tools that you have and that you use on a regular basis. But make sure there's a good definition about where to find your data product and how to actually use it. On top of that, you want to define SLAs and SLOs. You want to actually give guarantees about your data. Right? You want to have things in place like what is the latency? We spoke about that earlier. What is the latency that you are actually offering to your user base so that they can, on the one hand side, clear their expectations and see what they get by engaging with the data product that you're offering, but also that they could, again, reach out to you if they actually have the need to change something about this, right? Going back to the example in the beginning, if we would have this batch sales data set that is always delivered a couple hours into the morning of the next day, but we already have 20 teams that have complained that it's always late and that they really want to have it in a more frequent way, that is, of course, a completely different story because all of a sudden I have the actual drive from the organization, I have the business need, and I have something where this whole technologically advancement project is creating business value, right? And most importantly, you want to cover data quality monitoring. You want to have automated checks that are being executed against your data that allow you to understand when something is going wrong, right? If you're always delivering around 2 million records every day, but one day it drops down to 500,000, you do not want to get informed of that when your users are actually reaching out to you, but you want to have automated checks in place that actually identify this the moment, even before the users start consuming that. And again, to show like a couple examples on how that can look like, right? For the input, I've defined like 2 upstream dependencies here that you have, even with the different attributes that we were using there, that you could possibly use, and that allows people, again, to understand where the data is originally coming from. Right. For the output, I went with the simplest example, just providing an S3 path, so that people can clearly understand of where to actually find this data and how to fetch it. And looking at things like SLOs and data quality metrics, right, the moment I have actually explicitly specified something, it makes it known to the organization and it simplifies how people can work with the data product, right? I clearly have defined here that, well, this data set is available on a daily basis with a latency of 4 hours into the new day before the data is made available. Right. But I'm also looking at data quality metrics, right? Can I actually guarantee 100% completeness? Is this the aim? Or is it maybe also a cost factor that is not even required for the business needs that I'm fulfilling, right? Is something like 99.5 completeness sufficient? Things like null ratios in the respective attributes that I have, right? What are some where I have to always 100% provide the correct information, and what are some that maybe even for some particular business reason might not require this and might have some gaps in the data every once in a while? The last step that I want to mention is organizational responsibility. And this is like where it really broadens beyond the part that is solely focused just on your own local data product, so to say. And it comes with several aspects, right? Governance and compliance is one of the biggest ones, where you're looking at things like data access management, where you're looking at things like GDPR deletion. These are things that, of course, are relevant for every data product that's out there, and probably there are even things already across the organization that help you take care of that. Composability with other data products, right? Being able to bring things together. What if your sales data product tomorrow is to be combined with clickstream data on how the users are behaving on the web page because you want to use that to train some machine learning model? That is something where there needs to be a possibility to combine those two in the first place, right? And there's many examples where it's important that we know and understand across the organization on how we can actually bring those things together. And lastly, use existing platform tooling. Yeah. In many cases, there are already tools out there that help you solve those things. But even if not, talk to the folks and give the input on how to evolve it. That's it. That's what I had for you for today. Thanks a lot.